It started innocently enough, or at least that's how most neighborhood nightmares begin. The first time the blue SUV appeared on the edge of the driveway, the homeowner didn't think much of it. Maybe it was a guest visiting the new neighbor. Maybe it was temporary. But as the days stretched into weeks, it became clear that this was no mistake. The SUV was a permanent fixture, and its owner had every intention of keeping it there. The homeowner, who had just bought the modest two-story house at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, had chosen it precisely for the peace it promised. The street was lined with mature oaks, kids on bikes, and a neighborly stillness that suggested everyone knew their place and respected it. But one house down, there lived a woman who would become the very definition of entitled. A person who believed boundaries existed only for others. Her name was Karen, and she introduced herself not with a handshake, but with a complaint. The first encounter was about the garbage bins, how they were too close to her side of the property line. The second was about the fence height, how she thought it looked aggressive. The third, and most lasting, was about the driveway. The driveway in question stretched from the street to a small two-car garage. On paper, it was clearly marked as part of the homeowner's property. The concrete strip belonged entirely to the parcel, confirmed by the closing documents and the county map. But to Karen, the thin strip of grass that separated her yard from it seemed to grant her some kind of divine right of access that it started subtly. Her SUV would edge over a few inches onto the concrete, one tire perched confidently on the line. Then half the vehicle. Then, one morning, it was parked completely across the edge of the driveway, angled in such a way that the homeowner could barely pull their own car out. When confronted, politely, at first, Karen simply waved it off. She claimed the driveway was shared, that the previous owner had always let her park there, and that moving the SUV was unnecessary. There was something final in the way she said it, as though her version of reality was the only one that mattered. The homeowner checked the deed again that night. There was no easement, no shared agreement, no mention of access rights. The driveway was theirs. Still, wanting to keep peace, they avoided escalating. They assumed reason might eventually prevail. It didn't. Over the next month, the parking situation became a daily irritation. Sometimes, Karen would block half the driveway. Other times, she'd park diagonally, forcing the homeowner to squeeze past with inches to spare. Packages were left at odd angles because delivery drivers didn't know where to go. Guests avoided visiting altogether, afraid to take one of Karen's spots. The neighborhood began to notice. A few whispered sympathy from across the street, a nod from an elderly couple who said they knew how she could be. Others just looked away, not wanting to get involved. Karen had a reputation, and few dared to cross her. The homeowner started documenting everything, photo at desperation. Each snapshot was evidence, insurance against what was starting to feel like gaslighting. Because Karen's narrative grew with each confrontation. Now, she claimed that therefore patience ran out. One morning, after finding Karen's SUV fully blocking the garage door, the homeowner decided to take a different route, one that didn't involve another useless argument. They started digging, not in the literal sense, but in the bureaucratic one. The county office. The truth was refreshingly simple. A few clicks and a printed map confirmed what they already knew. The property line was clear. The driveway was private. There was no legal or historical basis for anyone else to use it. The clerk even laughed softly when the homeowner explained the situation. "You'd be surprised how many people think a property line moves because they say it does," she said, stamping the paperwork with a practiced thud. With those documents in hand, something shifted. For the first time since moving in, the homeowner felt a sense of control, small but steady. They ordered a professional survey, just to make it airtight. Bright orange flags appeared along the edge of the yard a week later, marking the true line for all to see. Each flag was a silent declaration. "This is mine." Karen didn't take it well. The first day, she came out as the surveyors worked, standing with arms crossed, her expression a mix of disbelief and indignation. She paced. She muttered. She even took photos, as though building a case of her own. The surveyors ignored her, used to this kind of scene. When they left, she stormed over and plucked the nearest flag out of the ground, tossing it into her garbage bin like it was an act of defiance. But the homeowner was done playing nice. The next morning, they replaced the flags, this time with small metal stakes. Harder to remove. Impossible to ignore. That afternoon, Karen's SUV returned to its usual spot, half on the line, half over it. A challenge, deliberate and smug. Yet this time, it didn't sting. The homeowner looked at it, then at the stack of official papers on the kitchen counter, and smiled for the first time in months. The fight wasn't over, but the outcome was already taking shape. They began to plan. Quietly, methodically. A call to a fencing company was made. A consultation was booked. Measurements were taken. A week later, stakes appeared not just to mark the line, but to outline the future. A neat wooden fence, 6 feet tall, running exactly along the boundary. It would be legal. It would be final. And it would drive Karen absolutely mad. As the first truckload of lumber arrived, the homeowner caught sight of Karen through her window, staring. Her mouth moved in disbelief. Her phone was in her hand. The storm, clearly, was about to begin, but the homeowner didn't flinch. They simply watched as the workers unloaded the posts and concrete mix, each thud on the driveway echoing like punctuation marks in a sentence that had been waiting too long to be written. By the time the sun dipped below the trees, the first post was in the ground, solid, immovable, and entirely on the right side of the law. And somewhere in that fading light, as Karen's SUV sat displaced on the curb for the first time, the homeowner realized something important. This wasn't just about a driveway anymore. It was about drawing a line that should have never been crossed. The next morning, the cul-de-sac was no longer quiet. The sound of drills, hammers, and saws broke the suburban calm, echoing between the rows of identical houses. The fence crew arrived early, eager to get started. They worked quickly and efficiently, measuring twice, drilling once, and setting each post into freshly mixed concrete. To any ordinary neighbor, it was just a home improvement project. But to Karen, it was an act of war. She appeared less than an hour after the first section went up. Her robe was still tied in a loose knot, hair half up, a coffee cup trembling slightly in her hand. The workers ignored her at first. They were professionals, used to people like her. But her voice carried across the lawn, shrill and incredulous. The homeowner watched from the front window, not engaging. There was no need. The paperwork on the counter, stamped and certified, said everything that needed saying. The survey, the permits, even the receipts, all in order. Still, Karen paced along the edge of the driveway, muttering, gesturing, snapping photos. At one point, she even pulled out a tape measure, dramatically stretching it from post to post, as if sheer willpower could make the numbers favor her. By mid-afternoon, a new section of fence rose tall and straight, defining the property with silent authority. The clean wooden panels cast sharp shadows on the pavement, a literal and figurative divide. That's when the escalation began. Karen called the homeowner's name from across the lawn, but received no answer. When she realized she was being ignored, she dialed her phone, first the HOA, then, apparently, the county. Anyone who would listen. Her voice grew louder, her tone angrier. She waved her arms, pointed at the fence, and claimed it was blocking access to her side of the driveway. The workers kept going. They had seen worse. By the end of the day, half the fence stood complete. It wasn't finished, but it was enough to change the landscape, enough to make the boundary undeniable. That night, the homeowner noticed something odd. The motion light near the garage flicked on around midnight. Through the blinds, a shadow moved near the driveway. The homeowner stepped quietly to the window and saw her, Karen, flashlight in hand, inspecting the fence. She tugged at one of the posts, as if testing its strength. It didn't budge. After a few frustrated moments, she stormed back to her house. The next morning, the homeowner found muddy footprints near the base of the fence and a few scratches on one of the boards. Nothing serious, but clear enough to prove intent. So, more photos were taken, time-stamped, documented, filed away. By then, word had spread around the neighborhood. People whispered in driveways, peered through blinds, slowed down as they passed. The spectacle was too good to ignore. In a quiet suburban street, a feud like this was entertainment. Some neighbors even started recording from their porches, eager to capture the next outburst. Karen, of course, noticed the attention. It only fueled her performance. That afternoon, she marched outside with printed papers, likely HOA bylaws or something she dug up from the internet. She taped them dramatically to her mailbox, as if it were a public notice board. A few minutes later, She placed a bright orange cone near the edge of the driveway, claiming it marked her half. The irony was almost poetic. The homeowner didn't react. They had learned by now that silence was the most infuriating response. Instead, they spent the evening calmly sanding and staining the new fence panels, sealing them in a rich honey color that caught the sunset beautifully. It was the next day when things took an unexpected turn. Two HOA board members showed up mid-morning, clipboard in hand, polite smiles masking their discomfort. They said there had been a concern about the new fence, that someone had complained it was encroaching on shared access. The homeowner simply handed them the folder, survey, permit, county letter, everything. The board members flipped through the documents, nodded, and left within minutes. Their expressions said it all. They'd been dragged into one of Karen's crusades and wanted no part of it. Hours later, Karen stood in her driveway, phone in hand, watching them drive away. Her jaw tightened. The HOA hadn't saved her. What followed was a shift, from confrontation to retaliation. Over the next few days, she began parking her SUV directly in front of the homeowner's mailbox. Not technically on their property, but close enough to block mail delivery. Then she started leaving her trash bins slightly over the line, just enough to make it an inconvenience. Small acts of defiance, designed to irritate, to reclaim some illusion of control, the homeowner kept documenting. Each act, each obstruction, neatly cataloged. It wasn't anger driving them anymore. It was precision, the kind that wins quiet wars. Then came the weekend. The fence crew returned to finish the job. They added the final panels, capped the posts, and installed a matching gate near the garage. The transformation was complete. The homeowner's driveway now stood entirely enclosed, private, secure. Unmistakably, the last panel went up. Karen appeared again, phone raised, recording. Her voice carried across the street, filled with outrage. She shouted about illegal fencing, about blocking emergency access, about community spirit. But no one joined her. Most neighbors stayed inside, pretending not to watch. A few filmed discreetly from their windows. And then, in a moment that would later go viral, Karen marched right up to the fence, yanked at the newly installed gate, and found it locked. Her frustration exploded. She kicked the bottom of the panel, shouted something unintelligible, and stormed back toward her SUV. The cameras caught everything. The rage, the disbelief, the flailing arms. The homeowner didn't post it, not at first. But someone else did, one of the neighbors across the street, who had been quietly documenting the entire feud. The clip spread quickly. Entitled neighbor freaks out over fence she claimed was her driveway. Within days, it was everywhere. The comment sections were brutal, the memes relentless. Karen's fury turned to humiliation. The following week, her SUV stayed parked further down the street. She stopped speaking to anyone. The cones disappeared. Even her trash bins stayed neatly in her yard. But the story wasn't over yet. A week later, the homeowner received an envelope in the mail. No return address, but clearly from Karen. Inside was a typed letter, filled with phrases like legal action, property rights, and dispute escalation. It was an empty threat, but it showed she wasn't done fighting. That night, the homeowner made one final trip back to the county office. There, they discovered something Karen clearly hadn't expected. The fence, the property line, and even the small strip of land between the two driveways all fell squarely on their side. And, more importantly, they could legally extend the fence a few feet further, enough to completely block any chance of Karen's SUV ever touching their concrete again. It was a perfect opportunity. And the homeowner planned to use it, because the only thing more satisfying than winning a petty war was making it legal. The letter from Karen might have unsettled some people, but not this homeowner. By now, every claim she made, every accusation she tossed around, was predictable. The threats had no teeth, just noise echoing against the sturdy new fence she hated so much. Still, the homeowner decided to take no chances. They wanted the matter settled once and for all, in writing, under law. The next morning, they drove to the county recorder's office. It was the same building where they'd first confirmed the property lines months ago. This time, however, the visit wasn't about proving ownership. It was about securing it permanently. With a few signatures and a modest filing fee, they requested an official easement clarification and a property boundary affirmation, a document that would forever record in the county's digital archive that the fence and the driveway were fully and legally theirs. While the paperwork processed, life on the cul-de-sac simmered. The once quiet street now carried a tension that seemed to hum beneath the sound of lawnmowers and sprinklers. Neighbors still whispered about the driveway war, but now, most of them avoided Karen altogether. Some said she'd been warned by the HOA to stop filing frivolous complaints. Others said her husband, who had been rarely seen since the conflict began, had taken to parking 2 blocks away just to avoid confrontation. Karen herself seemed to have quieted, but not out of acceptance. It was the quiet of someone plotting. That became clear one gray afternoon when the homeowner returned home from work to find a fresh note taped to their fence. In neat, slanted handwriting, it read, "Remove this immediately. You are in violation of HOA Harmony guidelines." Last warning. There was no signature, but it didn't need one. The homeowner took a photo, peeled the note off, and tossed it in the trash. No response. No reaction. Just documentation. Then, that night, they finalized their next move. The one that would make sure Karen's reign of petty tyranny would never touch their property again. They called a local property lawyer, not to sue, but to verify every inch of what they planned to do. The lawyer reviewed the deed, the survey, and the newly filed county affirmation. Then, with a smile, confirmed it. The homeowner had every right not only to keep the fence, but to extend it, gate it, and add signage if they wished, and so they did. Within 2 weeks, a contractor installed a matching extension to the fence, closing off the small strip of grass between the 2 properties. The new section created a narrow corridor that left no doubt. Karen's yard stopped abruptly at the boundary line. On the homeowner's side, a freshly poured strip of concrete replaced the worn edge of the driveway, extending it cleanly into their own yard. It wasn't just practical, it was symbolic. Then came the finishing touch, a small, tasteful sign mounted on the gate, reading "Private Property, legally surveyed and recorded." It wasn't aggressive. It was just final. That's when the fireworks began. The morning after the sign went up, Karen came outside and froze. Her SUV idled in the street as she stared at the gate, the sign, the flawless symmetry of the new boundary. It was like watching someone realize, in real time, that they had lost a war they didn't even fully understand. Her face went pale, then red. Her hands flailed, pointing at the sign, the fence, the sky, as if the entire world had turned against her. And once again, the neighborhood watched. Phones appeared in windows. A few kids on bikes stopped to whisper. One man down the street leaned against his mailbox, pretending to check the mail for a full 10 minutes. They'd seen her tantrums before, but this one was operatic, a crescendo of disbelief and fury. She shouted about injustice, about property theft, about illegal land seizure. None of it mattered. The homeowner stood calmly at the window, silent, as Karen's outburst became another viral clip waiting to happen. Sure did that be why that evening. The video had surfaced online. A neighbor across the street had uploaded it to a community Facebook group with the caption, "Karen loses it when neighbor makes fence official." Within days, it spread across social platforms, gaining millions of views. Commenters picked apart every detail, the fence, the sign, the wild gestures. They praised the homeowner's patience, mocked Karen's entitlement, and turned the quiet cul-de-sac into an overnight internet sensation. At first, the homeowner felt embarrassed by the attention. But then came the messages, strangers thanking them for standing up to unreasonable neighbors, sharing their own stories of boundary disputes, of people like Karen who thought rules didn't apply to them. The story resonated far beyond that sleepy street. Meanwhile, Karen's fury began to fade into retreat. Her SUV disappeared for long stretches, and the curtains in her front windows stayed drawn. The orange cones, the passive-aggressive notes, even her signature garden gnome, all gone. The silence that followed wasn't the calm of reconciliation, but of resignation. Then came the final piece of paperwork, a thin envelope from the county office. Inside was the completed, certified affirmation of property boundaries, with an official seal and document number. It was public record now. The driveway, the fence, and the disputed edge were all legally the line of lavender along the base, something peaceful to replace the months of tension. Delivery drivers found the house driveway. Friends began visiting it left on their porch. No threats this time, just a handwritten note that she just wanted to need to. Sometimes silence says everything. By midsummer, Karen's house went up for sale. The listing appeared quietly online, boasting great neighborhood energy, the kind of normal that feels almost surreal after chaos. Every now and then, though, a mention of the driveway incident, or a wink when passing by, the homeowner would just smile. Because, in the end, they hadn't just reclaimed a driveway. They'd reclaimed their peace. And thanks to one overly confident neighbor and a few viral clips, they'd also become something else, a quiet legend in the unspoken world of suburban justice. The fence still stood there, strong and even, its gates swinging gently in the breeze. Beyond it, the driveway stretched clean and open, exactly where it belonged, a simple line of wood and concrete. Proof that sometimes the best revenge isn't loud or cruel or even public. It's just legal.